Hello again, everybody. This is Jim Wycor the Elder again, and we're going to talk about KWOA in Worthington, radio station KWOA and KWOA FM. I accepted a job as general manager of those two stations in August of 1963, and Carol and I moved to Worthington, and Mr. Dick Olson, the owner of the station, had a Worthington moving company come and clean out my house and bring all the furniture to Worthington. And we rented a house on Hillcrest Avenue. And I had met Larry Benson. And he was manager of Benson Creamery in Worthington. And when we got there and moved in, he helped us move into this house and unloading the truck and everything and putting stuff away. And then he went to the dairy and came back, and we had three little kids, we had Susan's, and then Jim, John, and Matt, and Larry, and they were just little kids. And he went back to the dairy and came back with milk, butter, cream, ice cream, and cheese as a welcoming present for our refrigerator. Well, the radio station is on 730 kilocycles, the AM, the FM 95.1. The gross billing of the station of the 1962, the full year before, was $138,000. That's for the entire year. And I accepted the job and my salary was $10,000 a year, payable every 2 weeks. Anyway, I took over the station. There was a good staff. Remember, one of them was Gary J. Keenitz. He on the air name was Gary J. And he was from Sheldon, Iowa originally. But anyway, the station was primarily a country station. The AM station, we played, by country I mean a farm station, a lot of farm news and markets. And I started tweaking the programming on the station. The first thing I did was change the markets and look for a farm broadcaster. And there was a big man working at the station, and he was kind of a janitor and roused about and mowed the lawns. His name was Dominic Costello, and he was a farm boy from over at Wabasha, who had come to Nobles County as a herdsman for a dairy operation at Lismore, Minnesota. Well, he has a wife and a whole bunch of passel kids, and that didn't work out, and then he had a breakdown of some kind, and so the Minnesota Employment Commission got with Dick Olson, and Dick hired Dominic as a, like I said, as a janitor and lawnmower and all around just a maintenance guy. Well, I got there, and we didn't need a full-time janitor for that little radio station. And so I said, Dominic, what else can you do? He said, well, I know all about farming. And so I put him on the air doing farm news, and absolutely he was terrific. He drew a big-time audience, and we surveyed the audience, and he was starting a voluntary survey from farmers to send in a postcard with the number of acres of corn, number of acres of soybeans, wheat, how many hogs, how many cattle on your farm. And we got bushels full of mail from 4 states, from North Dakota, from South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska, and even couple letters from Wisconsin, western Wisconsin. And we compiled that information into how many hundreds of thousands of acres of corn, etc., etc. And we gave that information to our national reps, our sales reps in Chicago, New York, St. Louis, other places in Minneapolis, where there were farm advertising agencies that handled farm products. And we had a tremendous burst of business as a result of that. Well, the first year after we did that, we did $400,000 worth of national farm business. And then we were the first farm station in the country to start broadcasting farm markets every 15 minutes. And boy, did the farmers like that. That was, every farmer's got computers now, but they didn't have them then, and they depended on the markets and the daily markets on the radio. So it was a real boon for us. And I can remember getting a letter from a cattle feeder at Belle Plaine, Minnesota, and sending a letter to me and telling me how much he enjoyed our station and how much he enjoyed the markets. And Belle Plaine is quite 100 miles from Worthington. Anyway, the station was doing very, very well. Then about 3 years later, I was there 2 or 3 years, and I got a letter from Black Hawk Broadcasting in Waterloo, Iowa. There was a big company that owned radio and TV stations in Waterloo and Des Moines, Iowa, and KAUS in Austin, radio and television in Austin, Minnesota. And they offered me a job as a general manager of the TV and radio in Austin, Minnesota, with a salary of $25,000 a year to start. Well, I went to the owner of the station, Mr. Olson, Dick Olson, and told him about the offer, and I said, if he can match it, I'll stay. Well, he did. He matched it and raised my pay to $25,000 a year. And well, Bill, it was and everybody, it was quite a jump for me and my family. And we ended up staying there and owning part of the station for years and years and years. Well, we changed programming. We did promotions. I did remember now, this is farm country and a farm station. I had May Beef Month, June Dairy Month, March Hog Month, and 1 year for Beef Month, I was giving away a young Simmental bull, and we had him in the radio station was situated on the hill west of Worthington and 3 miles west on Highway 16. Well, interestingly enough, that I found in front of the building a marker in the ground from the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, and this was the second highest point above sea level in the state of Minnesota, right where that station was. And its first highest place is up at Grand Marais, way up northeastern Minnesota. Well, anyway, then the tower was there too, so our FM station had a vast coverage, and the AM, of course, covered 47 counties in 4 states. But the previous management, the manager of the station, and Mr. Olson, who was primarily he raised turkeys, and he first came to Worthington as the 4-H leader for the county extension office, and then was hired by Worthmore Produce and Creamery Company in Worthington, and he was in the business of selling turkey poults. Well, and then he got hired by Honeymead Company, big feed company in Mankato in Minnesota, and he moved to Wilmer, and he was organizing farmers to raise turkeys for the turkey plant in Wilmer, and it's Jenny O Turkeys now, and at any rate, he saw an opportunity during World War II to raise turkeys himself. And one year, and I think it was the year 1944, he told me he had 2 million turkeys on range and being raised on farms. And his profit was $1 a bird. Now that means he made $2 million profit that year. And with that money, he was in Wilmer, and he knew the program director at KWLM in Wilmer, and this guy kept telling him, Dick, boy, Worthington doesn't have a radio station. This is 1947, and you ought to build a radio station there. Well, he applied to the FCC, and he got a construction permit to build KWOA on 730 kilohertz, the daytime station to operate only from sunrise to sunset. That means in January, the station signed on at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, in farm country, Bill, the farmers are up and going to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they want to hear the weather and everything else. Well, the station couldn't do that. And Mr. Olson became a board member of the National Daytime Broadcasters Association. And when I took over management of the station, he had the association appoint me as a director of the Daytime Broadcasters Association in his place. And so I started going to the meetings, first in Chicago and then in Washington, D.C. and wherever. And I was in that position for many, many, many years. And the object was to try to get extended hours for daytime radio stations. Well, in late 1970s, I was elected president of the Daytime Broadcasters Association, who previously president for 20 years was a guy named Ray Livesey from Mattoon, Illinois. And so I'm at a board meeting in Washington, D.C., and we had daytime broadcasters from North Carolina, Bend, Oregon, from all over the country. There were about 15 of us on that board. And I told them that, okay, if you want me to be president, we have to have a concerted 5-year plan, a 5-year effort to get Congress to pass a bill allowing us to operate from sunrise to sunset, or 2 hours before sunrise to 2 hours after sunset, whichever is longer. Well, they agreed. And then your aunt, my wife Carol, she volunteered and she came to the station and worked 8 hours a day as a secretary of the Daytime Broadcasters Association, handling the mail. We sent letters to every daytime station in the country, telling them what our plan was and asking them for contributions. Well, at that time, there were 2,500 daytime-only radio stations in the country, but at any given time, only about 300 of them actually contributed money to the cause. And the congressman in southwestern Minnesota at the time was a young man from Slayton named Vin Weber, pretty famous politician now and consultant. And a senator from Pressler from South Dakota was, his mother listened to our station, and his father did as a farmer. And so I got him to, Mr. Vin Weber, we got our heads together and we wrote legislation, a bill for the Daytime Broadcasters Bill, and he introduced it in this House, and eventually, because of pressure from daytime broadcasters, we got 118 co-sponsors. And then Senator Pressler from South Dakota, he introduced this identical bill in the Senate, and we ended up with 33 senators co-sponsoring the bill. Well, in 1984, I testified before the Senate Commerce Committee, and the chairman of the committee was Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, and the vice chairman was this Senator Pressler from South Dakota, so that was a help. And I testified for 2 hours at the hearing, and I have a tape recording, videotape recording of that testimony in my files. Well, the Federal Communications Commission saw how many co-sponsors we had in the House and the Senate, and looked at our bill. And the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission at that time was a man named Mark Fowler. And I got a phone call, and this was something for a little small-town radio station manager to get a phone call from the chairman of the FCC, and it not being a bad one. He called and said, Mr. Wykor, we've been following your legislation in the Congress, and we think it would be bad for the FCC if that legislation passed. But we do understand what you're after, and we'd like to discuss it with you, and possibly we can do that with a rulemaking at the FCC and not include Congress. Well, I said, when can we meet? And I said, I got my committee of officers of the daytime broadcaster would be happy to meet with you and discuss it. And so we set up a meeting in Washington, D.C. at the Gramercy Park Hotel, which it's not there any longer. It was torn down, but it was an old-time hotel for many years. And we had a meeting in their a meeting room at the hotel, and Mr. Fowler and 3 of his staff came to the meeting. And the meeting lasted 3 or 4 hours, and the result of it was we hammered out an agreement that the FCC would do a rulemaking that would allow stations daytime stations, except those on clear channels. That required a international treaty, because the 1934 broadcast treaty gave clear channels to the Bahamas, Mexico, and parts of South America. Well, 730 kilohertz with our station in Worthington was on a Mexican and Canadian clear. Well, we did some research. I contacted the station in Dauphin, Manitoba on 730, and they said, "Do we ever interfere with you?" And no. They contacted stations in Mexico. No interference. At any rate, 2,300 of the 2,500 daytime stations got some kind of relief from those restrictive hours. In the case of KWOA, we got 148 watts after sunset and before sunrise. On 730 kilohertz, 148 watts, we covered 30 counties in 4 states, and because of our frequency, low frequency. And it was, well, we got this done. The 5-year plan, and it was 5 years. I traveled every Thursday for 5 years. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drove to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, boarded an Ozark airliner to St. Louis, changed planes in St. Louis, and flew to Washington, D.C. And got there at 10 o'clock in the morning and lobbied the FCC and Congress all day long. And I got back to the D.C. airport at 6 o'clock and left there, flying to St. Louis and then Sioux Falls. And I'd get back to Worthington about midnight, and I'd be on the air the next morning at 6 o'clock. I'd be at the station. Did that every week for 5 years. Well, KWA invested $130,000 in traveling expense for me, and got a little reimbursement from the Daytime Broadcasters Association, but there wasn't that much money there, and so we used that primarily for meeting space in Washington and meals and things of that nature. At any rate, we got the thing done. When KWA was able to sign on at 6 o'clock in the morning all year round, and we sold enough advertising in between 6 and 8 in the morning to get our $130,000 back in advertising revenue in 8 months. That's how important that morning time was to us. At any rate, the stations were very, very happy, and the year at the National Association of Broadcasters meeting that year in Las Vegas, Gary Capps, who was the vice president from Bend, Oregon, he had a very expensive watch engraved and presented to my wife, Carol Wykor, for her work on behalf of the Daytimers. And I have a clock that's half white and half black. And there's 6 of those clocks made. And they were presented. I have one. Congressman Webster has one. Senator Pressler has one. Chairman Fowler, FCC, got one. And Gary Capps, the Caps from Bend, Oregon got the last one. And it was a memento for the Daytime Broadcast Association work, and we got it done. At any rate, Bill, I was always been a promoter, and as I started to say, one beef month we had to give away a Simmental bull and had him in a pasture west of the radio station land, and a young farmer won that bull, and my farm broadcaster at that time was Bruce Lease, and driving 2 tractors, a lawnmower and then a big tractor, we tried to herd that bull, a very skittish bull, into a pen close to the building so the guy could come and get it. Well, we couldn't get it done. So I got a hold of a farmer friend of mine, Beal Lewing, who knew the young man that won the bull, and he got several guys with horses and lassos, and they came, a bunch of cowboys, and they herded that bull and got him. Oh, an aside, I bought that bull from, turns out it was my daughter-in-law, Jane Trunnell's father, Emmett Trunnell, who was raised Simmental cattle at north of Rushmore, Minnesota, and I bought the bull from him. And the bull was taken by this young farmer that won it. It was a good bull, but he had a bad habit. This bull had the habit of ingesting iron, bolts, nuts, bolts, pieces of fence, and so his stomach was full of metal, and the only way to get it out was to butcher him and take it out. And so but he was a good bull for 3 or 4 years before that happened. And then I did a pork month promotion where we gave away cut, wrapped, and frozen half a hog, bought 5 hogs and made 10 packages and gave that away. And Dairy Month, we had a promotion with the Dairy Princesses, and we really enjoyed that work. And then one time I had arranged for a trade out with a resort up at Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, to give away a 1 week at that resort. And this was we were attempting to locate our audience, and we told people that please write us a letter and tell us where you listen to KWOA. We're trying to determine how large an audience we have, and we'll throw your letter into a barrel and we'll pull one out, and that person will get the week's vacation for his family, him and his family at this resort in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, including a fishing boat and everything else. Well, when we drew the letters out, the letter that was pulled out of the barrel was postmarked Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Well, that was great. That's 60 miles away, and we had a lot of listeners over that way, and that was good. Well, so I wrote a letter to the winner, and there was no email back then, and this was in the 60s. I wrote a letter to the winner and found out that he was a prisoner in the South Dakota State Penitentiary at Sioux Falls. And of course, he couldn't take the vacation. So I sent him the week would have cost $67, and so I sent him a check for $67. And I thought, and that got publicity all over the country. And in 1964, the Surgeon General of the United States issued a ruling blocking radio and TV stations from advertising cigarettes. So what I did was I wrote a letter to Telecasting magazine and letter to the editor saying that effective immediately, KWOA and KWFM, our 2 stations, effective immediately, will refuse to accept all cigarette advertising. Well, we never had any. Never did. But I got nationwide publicity because of that letter. from everybody except the cigarette companies. And it was, our station became well known. So as president of the Daytime Broadcasters Association, we got that job done. Then we were at odds with the National Association of Broadcasters, who represented all broadcasters, full-time and daytime. But they thought we were a thorn in their side, particularly the clear channel stations like WCCO in Minneapolis, WBBM in Chicago, KMA in Louisiana, WTMJ Milwaukee, stations like that. Well, so the president of the National Association of Broadcasters, NAB at that time, was a man named Eddie Fritz. And he was a broadcaster from Mississippi. And he called me up and said, why don't you merge the DBA now that you got that done with the NAB? And I said, well, I'd be happy to talk about it, but I said, we have an attorney that we owe $40,000 to, and we don't have enough money to pay him. So if we merge with you, you're going to have to pay that lawyer, and we'll give you everything we have in our treasury. At that time, we had $7,000 in the treasury, and we owed the lawyer $40,000. And they agreed. So my lawyer, Greg Skoll from Washington, D.C., who is still a friend to this day, and the Washington attorney for the Minnesota Broadcasters Association, we made the merger. And then they developed, their board of directors changed their organization and had a Daytime Broadcasters Committee of the NAB. And I was a member, but I got Wayne Eddy from Northfield, Minnesota, who was on our board of directors of the DBA. I got him appointed as chairman of that committee in Washington, D.C. And that went on for many, many years and eventually disappeared. Well, it was a very interesting run. I stayed with the KWA until 1988, 89. But Bill, I was at one time vice president of the National Radio Broadcasters Association, which originally was the National Association of FM Broadcasters. And I joined that, and I became a vice president of that. And then I was the board of directors of the NAB, so I had a pretty illustrious career as a leader in the broadcast industry for a young guy from Worthington, Minnesota, daytime radio station. It was pretty interesting. At any rate, the station was extremely successful. And Dick Olson, the owner and the guy who built it, died of a heart attack in 1973. And so his widow, Josephine Olson, who had been vice president of the company, became president. And we continued working together and running the station. It was very successful and very profitable. Got new announcers and new people, and everything went well. And then she decided to sell the station, and at that time I owned 10% of the property. And I said, and I offered to buy the station if she would sell it to me on a I'd give $100,000 in down payment and pay the balance so much a year for 10 years. But she didn't, she wanted more money than that, and than I was willing to pay. And so she sold it to a guy named Don Rabbit from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin for just under $2 million. And so I became the general manager, vice president of his company and general manager of the stations. But it was a different arrangement, different setup, and frankly, I was not happy because I'd been the decision maker and everything for 27 years, and all of a sudden I wasn't. So so I started looking, and at that time the Minnesota Broadcasters Association, its leader was a broadcaster from Shakopee named Ray Foslid, and he was a part-time executive director of the association. But the association needed some input. It needed to change its bylaws and change its mission statement. And I applied for the job as executive director of the Minnesota Broadcasters Association. And they had been doing a nationwide search to fill that position. And when I applied, several broadcasters said, if Wycor, we all know Wycor's background and his success. We don't have to look any farther. All the rest of these applicants, forget them. Let's hire Wycor. So I took the job for $55,000 a year, plus the automobile and insurance for me and my wife Carol. And we moved to Hopkins. They paid for my moving to. We rented a townhouse in Hopkins, and the office was in the same building as what was then to become the Minnesota Broadcasters Association Museum. But this was, at that time, it was a collection of radios owned by one individual, and so I was one of the persons responsible for the organizing and founding of the Minnesota Broadcast Museum of Minnesota, and it's still there today and very successful. Well, I stayed with the association for 8 years. When I first took over, the association had $15,000 in the bank, $300,000 in payables, and no receivables. Well, 8 years later, Bill, when I retired from that, and I turned 65, and I retired from the full-time job and just became their lobbyist, state lobbyist. When I left the bank, they had $815,000 in the bank and in brokerage account, and $300,000 in receivables. All bills were paid.
Wow.
And that's how I left it in an excellent condition. And I became a radio station broker. I was brokering radio stations and selling them and consulting. And I formed a company called Jim Wycor Communications.
Do you want a glass of water or something?
Yeah, I need.
Okay.
I sure do, Bill. And at any rate, I had a very successful career in the broadcasting industry. I became known all across the country as a general manager that got things done, and not only for our station but for the industry, and that was it just worked out well. All that time, of course, in Worthington, I was raising a family. Jim, Matt, Larry, daughter Susan, and when we moved to Minneapolis, it was just me and Carol, and our boys were growing up and married and all doing their own thing. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Folks, the Bill I'm referring to is my nephew Bill Wycor from Red Wing, Minnesota, who is a outstanding computer genius in my mind, anyway. And
thank you.
So then I stayed with the association for 8 years, then became my own business. But one of the things that I accomplished in 1994, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated a bunch of field offices, including the one in St. Paul. And then what they did was they eliminated these field offices where engineers worked that did surprise inspections of radio and TV stations. And so what they did was they dropped all those field offices, but they changed their fines. They instituted a fine system of, if you were caught violating the rules, the broadcast rules of the FCC, The fine was $12,500 per occurrence per day. Small station,
Wow.
small station like having the tower painted wrong could end up going broke. Well, I was president of the Minnesota Broadcasters Association. John Lobbs, a friend of mine, was president of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association. And we started working with the engineer in charge of the St. Paul office that hadn't been closed up yet. And we came up with a plan of self-inspection, or inspection we went to the commission and said, listen, doctors police themselves, lawyers police themselves, dentists police themselves. Why can't broadcasters? Why can't we have a program of broadcasters inspections? Well, we signed a contract with the FCC that would allow state broadcast associations, working with the commission, to institute a program called Alternative Broadcast Inspection Program, ABIP. Well, it was a tremendous success. The first states in the country that put it to work were Minnesota and Wisconsin. Other state associations jumped in. And then I worked for the NBA for 3 years after I retired as a part-time lobbyist. And when I ceased doing that in 1997 or 98, at the request of state broadcast associations, I became working at consolidating and working on establishing engineers, qualified engineers, to do ABIP inspections in various states. Well, I have an engineer in Lakeview, California, one here in Phoenix, Arizona, one in Moorhead, Minnesota, and one in Northfield, Minnesota. Highly qualified engineers. And we conduct those inspections in the states we conduct them in are California, Arizona, Hawaii, Alaska, Nevada, Colorado, Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, and I believe that's it. And those engineers are still working to this day, and here it is 2018, and they're working doing those inspections, and it's working out very, very well. And it just I coordinate those inspections, and I've had a great time doing it. And the engineers, they're all retired from their full-time positions. Like Arvid Sonstoli in Moorhead was the chief engineer of WDAY, AM and FM and TV in Fargo. Ed Sutton in Phoenix was the chief engineer of KPHX television in Phoenix, Arizona. Bill Ziers, who lives in Lakeview, California, was a FCC field engineer, so he knows his stuff. And then Mike Troji in Northfield, Minnesota, was a consultant to radio and TV stations, and he worked as an engineer for Collins Broadcasting Company many years in the United States, and then he worked for them in Europe. And then when he retired and came back to Minnesota, we got him involved in this inspection program, and he's very successful. At any rate, that's continuing. And Bill, I think I've about told my story.
Well, why don't we talk about your Hall of Fame?
Oh, yes. The Minnesota Broadcasters Hall of Fame. I was inducted in 1995, 2004 or 5. They wanted to induct me when I was still president of the association, and I refused. I said, no, there's other people that should be inducted, and you guys can induct me after I'm not working here anymore. It was be untoward, I thought, for association executive to be inducted into the association's Hall of Fame at that time. And so anyway, we had several broadcasters who had been selected as outstanding Minnesotans. And we had pictures of them hanging on the walls all over the offices. And we inducted them into the Hall of Fame en masse, all 90, 60, 40, or whatever. And then after that, we took nominations, and we inducted dozens and dozens of really outstanding broadcasters in the state. And the association just this past year inducted Joe Soucheray and as a broadcaster at KSTP in St. Paul, and he's also a newspaper writer, a columnist. And we inducted people like sports director Halsey Hall, Ray Scott, that type of people. And it was a very interesting event. It continues to this day under the sponsorship of the NBA and the Broadcast Museum. And this last fall, October, the induction was held at the museum with a very nice evening with hors d'oeuvres and wine and large delegation of people, and it was it was a fundraiser for the museum as well. And anyway, I was the co-founder of the Hall of Fame, and we had prior to that we had a program of every year selecting an outstanding Minnesotan. Now, this was not necessarily a broadcaster. For instance, outstanding Minnesotans were Earl Bakken, the founder of Medtronics, who was from Columbia Heights High School, actually. And then we referred to him as Turkey Olson, but E.O. Olson of the Genio Turkey Foundation in Turkey Company in Wilmer. And people of that, and then Gino Paolucci, founder of Chungking Chinese Foods in Duluth. And people of that stripe were inducted into as our outstanding Minnesotan. We took them into the Hall of Fame as well at a later date. At any rate, it was just a tremendous run for me, and I had conventions of the Minnesota broadcasters. We moved it around the state. We had conventions in Duluth, Brainerd, Bemidji, Moorhead, Wilmer, Worthington, Austin, Winona, Mankato, and we moved it around the state so broadcasters would get to know their own state, and then the broadcasters in a particular area would do a good job putting on that convention. Then we also had an exhibit hall in St. Paul or Minneapolis. We would have 50 or 60 exhibitors. These are people who supplied equipment and things to the broadcast industry, and that was a money maker. And I had a gentleman named Al Paulson, who lives in St. Paul, who, by the way, is 50% Chippewa Indian, but outstanding businessman. And he had a company called Marketplace Productions, and I retained him to organize and establish those trade shows, and they were very successful for many years. And my successor, for some reason, dropped them, but things changed in the industry. At one time, you were allowed to own two stations, an AM and an FM in the same community. Then they changed it to 5 AM, 5 FM, and in separate communities. And then they changed it to 6 and 6, and then 12 and 12. And then the FCC just said, hey, you can own as many as you want, only under certain circumstances. And now we have a situation where a company like Clear Channel Broadcasting owns 11 or 1,200 radio stations. So there's stations are concentrated, maybe 4 or 5 stations operating out of one building in their community. And where we used to have a general manager at every station, there you have a general manager over 5 stations, and so there's fewer people to come to a trade show or a convention, and the association kind of diminished a little bit. But Billy, I had a great run, and I'm now, as I were speaking here, if you're seeing me, I look my 86 years, and I feel it, and
you got an incredible memory.
Yeah,
I am just amazed at how you remember how many people and names and places. It's incredible.
Well, I've tried to develop that.
Yeah, if you can tell me about how you started getting that, because how you remember people from 40 years ago and their names and their places and things.
Billy, the people I worked with, they were in the broadcast industry. They're unique. I don't remember all of them, but most. Those that I had close relationships with, or the ones I worked with, are, for instance, there's a broadcaster from Brainerd named Charlie Persons, who was owned a Brainerd radio station, but he was an old-time engineer. He went to work for WEBC in Duluth in 1927.
Oh, wow.
And he was just out of high school, and he was a ham radio operator and a nerd, and got a job there, and actually his first several months, he worked at the station free for nothing. Then he hired him, and he became a very highly qualified consulting engineer. He built the cable system in Ely, Minnesota in 1953. He built the radio station in Ely in 1952. And then he owned a radio station in Brainerd. And 1 year back in the 80s, early 80s, my station in Worthington started broadcasting the Minnesota Vikings football games. And the president of the Vikings was a man named Jim Finks, very famous football executive. And he invited all of us stations to come to Minneapolis to go to a Vikings game and come in the night before and have a banquet and food and drinks. So we're at the hotel in Bloomington. And when I got the invitation, I called him up and said, "Boy, Mr. Finks, I'd love to bring my wife and I'll come, but I'd love to bring my 3 boys because they'd sure love to go to a football game." So it was December 6th. I can remember that day where Vikings were playing the Chicago Bears, and the temperature was way below zero, and the wind chill was about 30 below, and it was cold. And the boys and the boys were dressed up in our snowmobile suits and felt boots. And Carol spent a lot of the time in the restroom where it was warm, but it was very cold. There was a man sitting across the aisle from us who had a 6-pack of bottles of beer. And we watched him open the beer, and it shot out frozen. It was that cold. And so we were at the Saturday night before the game, and Carol and I were at a dinner, and the boys were up in the hotel room, and Mr. Finks had a whole bunch of soda pop and hors d'oeuvres delivered to the room for the 3 boys.
Wow.
And one of the things was a bacon wrapped around, it looked like a chestnut or something, but I think it was, I don't remember what it was, but Larry thought it was really wonderful, and he bit into it, and he didn't like it. Anyway, it was, we had a great time. The game, the Bears won it 6-0, but boy, was it cold. Well, we got home that Sunday night, and everybody went to school the next day, and I went to work. Well, we broadcast the Vikings. I have to digress one moment, Billy, and remember I was talking about yesterday or about WKEE in Huntington, West Virginia?
Yep.
Did I mention the Cincinnati Redlegs baseball game?
I don't remember if we talked about.
Anyway,
the FM part.
Yes, that's right.
We did talk
we
about
did
that.
Yep. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, the FM station in Worthington was one of the few FM stations that was, well, up until 1975, 1 year, I think it was May or June of 1975, the total gross income for the FM station was $15 for the month. And there were not many FM radios. Well, I did promotions of giving away FM radios to get people to know about it and listen to them. And now FM is extremely successful all over the country, especially in Worthington. And the FM signal is very good, very broad. At any rate, I brought that station along, and KWA AM, and had a great run as an association executive, as a volunteer later, and then as a paid executive later on. And I just had I was just fortunate that I got into the broadcasting business, and I enjoyed a wonderful career, 55 years actually, and I'm still working with Jim Weicker Communications and those inspections. Really, I've had a great run.
Can you talk about some of the promotions?
Oh,
you did, like the Turkey Day.
Oh yeah, King Turkey King Turkey Day in Worthington.
Yeah.
In 1973, Lou Hudson of the Worthington Daily Globe, who used to work for me at the radio station, and I, E.O. Olson, the president of the Worthington Creamery and Produce Company, was driving home from Texas, and he had to come through the small town of Cuero, Texas, and there were signs all over that the turkey capital of the world. Well, Worthington, Minnesota claimed that title, and his produce company processed hundreds of thousands of turkeys every year. Back in the old days, in the 30s and 40s, before Thanksgiving, they shipped trainloads of processed turkeys out of Worthington all over the country. Well, he saw this Cuero thing, and he got back to Worthington, and he told people about turkeys being raised in Cuero, Texas, and that they drove them to market like they herded cattle. They walked the turkeys to town. And well, the Chamber of Commerce and me and Lou Hudson, we challenged Cuero to a turkey race. The winner of the turkey race to be declared turkey capital of the world. Well, there's to be a race in Worthington on Turkey Day and a race in Cuero on their celebration, Turkey Fest. The first year, Cuero came to Worthington, and our turkey was a white bird. We had a turkey runoff. We had people come in, bring in their turkeys, and we chose the fastest bird. Well, it was this white bird, and a young girl whose parents went to our St. Matthew's Lutheran Church and were farmers south of Worthington, and she had this very fast bird. Well, and we did that Friday night in the courthouse square in downtown Worthington, and we selected that bird. Well, the next day, the racers were Lou Hudson, me, and our Chamber of Commerce president, who was a Hispanic guy named Tachi Toronas, and really a good guy. And, well, we lost the race. And so, and we had named this turkey, and white turkey, we'd named it, well, I forgot the name, but anyway, when that turkey lost the race, guess what happened to it? It was cooked and eaten. So when a month later, we're going to Cuero, Texas to race, we got a new turkey. And this was a great big bronze-breasted turkey, the old-time turkey, big one. And we named him Tomfoolery. Well, we went to Cuero, Texas, and we won that race in 33 seconds.
Like a Miss America, was that one of those?
Yeah, no, that was in Worthington, Miss America. We came, Campbell Soup Company had a great big plant in Worthington back then, where they processed chickens and turkeys, and they made chicken broth, which they shipped to Chicago in tank trucks that looked like gas trucks, but they're full of turkey, just full of chicken broth, and that went into Campbell Soup at a factory in Chicago. Well, yeah, Miss America was there. What a beauty! There's a picture of me holding that idiot white turkey. Well, okay, so we won the race in Cuero, and the overall time was, because our white turkey was so terrible, Cuero won that first race because we had to combine the times. And so we decided the next year we're gonna get a really good turkey and train it. And we named from then on, from 1974 until to this day, the Worthington turkey is named Paycheck because it goes so fast. and is won, well, more often than lost, but it was. I remember going to that first time we went to Cuero, Texas. There was a brewery in Texas named Lone Star Beer, and they came to Turkey Fest, and me and Lou Hudson and Tachi Taronis, we were dressed, and we had a plaid shirt and striped bib overalls. That was our uniform, and I wore cowboy boots, and so did Tachi. Anyway, we get down there, and they had a dance hall, or a great empty building. They used it as a dance hall, and they had a band in the. The band was from Corpus Christi, Texas. It was the band was called they're from Corpus Christi, and they said featuring good old Ted and his musical lawnmower. There was a guy that had a lawnmower with the blades taken off. He'd start it up and rev it up in time to the music, and it was the Port Aransas Philharmonic Jazz Band is what it was, and featuring good old Ted and his musical lawnmower. Well, the Lone Star Beer Company had a advertising agency that had a production company there, filming everything at the Turkey Fest to produce beer commercials. And it turns out that they did this at events all over the state of Texas, and they would use those events as beer commercials. And in my case, I'm dancing with the Turkey Fest princess, and I had a bottle of Lone Star beer in the back pocket of my bib overalls. And I ended up in a Lone Star beer commercial. And they did, the agency, when I got home, I got a letter with $100 check in it, and I had to sign off because to use my in the commercial. Well,
you're acting, huh?
Yep, and well, it was a wonder. There was one of the guys from Cuero, Texas, was Bubba Schultz, and he was a turkey, great big guy. Bubba Schultz. Well, when we got there, we went down there with a motorhome from Tom Coppy's Chevrolet Motors in Worthington, and we had a whole group, and Carol and I, and Tom and his wife, and Tachi and his, anyway, and so we got there, and Bubba met us, and Billy, they drove around town in their cars and trucks, drinking beer, driving and drinking. And it turns out that they learned that from Lyndon Baines Johnson, who did it all the time. So it was exciting. And then I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, Lou Hudson, who now lives in Baxter, Minnesota, and he's pushing 90, I'm 86. We were invited back to Turkey Day in Worthington to be the grand marshals of the parade and featured speakers, and we have pictures of that. And we had a great time, and Jim and Diane came there, and other relatives of Diane's that actually live in Worthington, and it was quite an experience. It's just I had a great career, and I wouldn't change any of it. I don't think.
That's great.
Except that probably the thing I would change is going to West Virginia. That was a mistake.
There's stories about ping pong balls. Can you tell that story?
That was another promotion I did in Worthington. I was promoting all the time. Well, for a big community-wide sale, I got 500 ping pong balls, and we went to the stores, and the stores decided how many they wanted to put their name on. And it was they got advertising plus 1, 3, 5, 10 ping pong balls with their name on it, and what the ping pong ball was worth. And there was one ball in there that was the Chamber of Commerce that was worth $500. There was several of them worth $100, and several of them worth like a case of beer from the bar, and a lot of them were like with Taco John's. He had 10 of them, and they were each worth 2 tacos.
Is that Taco Matt?
Taco Matt, yeah. His store was Taco John's, but we called him Taco Matt. His name was Matt Oleski, and really nice man. Anyway, so we had a crop sprayer that headquartered in Worthington, flew out of Worthington Airport, and I got him to dump the ping pong balls. Well, I went out to the airport, and the belly of this crop plane was usually full of herbicide or insecticide. So I went inside that plane, inside the belly, and I cleaned it all out and wiped it all out and had it clean as a whistle. And we dumped those 500 ping pong balls in there. And he flew over town at the designated time, came right up Main Street. He was 10 feet above the hotel, of the buildings. I mean, he was. And he dumped the ping pong balls, and they were, I suppose there were 10,000 people in town, and with fishnets, and it was fun. And then the next year, I'm going to do it again, and the FAA had told the pilot, "You're not doing that anymore. You can't fly that low over town." So I didn't have an airplane to drop the ping pong balls, but I had a friend, a lady from Fairmont, let's see, Jack Hyde owned from Faribault, and she had a hot air balloon, and she would give hot air balloon rides, and I got her to come and go hot air balloon and drop them off. Well, it was Southwest Minnesota is oftentimes extremely windy, and it was a very windy day, and she said she couldn't float over the town. It would go too fast and too dangerous. So we tethered the balloon at the Northland Mall, and she was probably 300 feet in the air, and she dumped the ping pong balls out of her basket and they all ended up just about in the same place. And so that one wasn't so successful. But, and then, because we couldn't use an airplane, we never did it again. It was, using the plane was, that really, both Sioux Falls television stations came over there and had pictures of the plane dropping the ping pong balls and pictures of me at the Chamber of Commerce. And it was, all these efforts were to promote the radio station and get it publicity statewide and area-wide and and then we got a lot of national publicity because of various things we did. And that's why that station was successful, financially and otherwise. I think I told you that the first year, 1962, the previous year that I got there in August of 63, 1962, the gross billing of KWOA and KWFM for the whole year was $138,000. When I left there in 1988, we were doing $138,000 in four of the 12 months of the year.
Wow.
And doing $2-3 million worth of business.
Oh,
and
can you talk about the radio that Grandma had in her
sure.
kitchen?
My mother lived in Columbia Heights, where I grew up, in the suburb of Minneapolis. And she had a radio, a table radio, just a small radio sitting on her kitchen table. And when I was home one time, I tuned it to 730 on my frequency, and the signal was coming in. It wasn't wall to wall, but it was there, and you could hear what was going on. And I did the news every morning from 7:30 till 8 o'clock, half-hour newscast. And Ma turned on that radio every morning, a little before 7:30, and listened to Jimmy on the radio every day. And I thought that was kind of unique and different. And
you're living so far away from Minneapolis.
Yes.
And then Grandma would say, Jimmy's talking now, be quiet.
Well, then the FCC gave a guy from St. Paul a construction permit to build a station in Hudson, Wisconsin on the frequency of 740. That's the adjoining frequency, and that caused interference to my 730 signal, and Grandma couldn't hear it anymore after that. But it was exciting for Grandma.
And she had the antenna was taped to the wall.
Yeah. And your dad and I had done that because your dad, he was a very knowledgeable engineer, an electrical engineer, and your dad, Billy, was the very first electrical engineer that 3M ever hired. I don't know if you know his first success.
No.
At the Hutchinson tape plant?
No.
Well, for those of you listening, if you take a roll of Scotch tape, not the white stuff, but regular old Scotch tape, and you pull it fast, it screeches, right? Well, at the plant in Hutchinson where they made this tape, they had rolls of that tape that were as big as an automobile. And it would come off that roll and come out the other end of the plant in those little 25-cent deals.
Oh, yeah.
and the noise was just a screech. And it turned out that people working in that plant could only work 2 weeks. And they had really a lot of workmen's compensation claims because people losing their hearing. Well, your dad was hired by 3M, and your dad was an assistant professor of engineering at the University of Minnesota after he graduated, stayed there as a teacher. And they found out somehow, and talked to somebody at the U, that this was a pretty smart young man, and they offered him a job, and he took it at 3M Company, and they talked about this problem at the Hutchinson plant. They knew that if they heated up the tape, it would go from a screech to a hiss. And so they put the tape, big roll of tape, into a great big oven. Well, what happened was the outside was heated and burned, And then they heated the core, and then the inside was heated and burned, but the noise was not diminished. Well, your dad, my brother Walt, was a radar operator and radar engineer in the Army Air Corps, or the U.S. Air Force, and in 1945 and 45, he was in charge of building what was then the most powerful radar installation in the world on Tinian Point, Guam. And he used to brag about putting sausages on a stick and holding them up in front of the radar and cooking them. And I was always kind of angry with him that he didn't come back and invent the microwave and we'd all be rich. Well, he came up with an idea to heat that tape with radio waves, RF radio frequency waves. And he built the transmitters and had them working. And it worked.
Wow.
And it worked. And it saved the 3M company a lot of money in workman's comp claims. Well, it's operating for about 8 or 10 months. And 3M company gets a letter from the Federal Communications Commission that you're operating an unlicensed transmitter. But they got it licensed and they continue to do that. And but your dad Billy was an outstanding engineer, and I know that he became an executive with and he was director of the electronic sector of 3M. Yeah. And incidentally, just as an aside for you, I have a neighbor in Shoreview, 4 houses away from me, named Bob Peterson, who was an engineer that worked under your dad at 3M. And he told me that your dad was the best boss he ever had. And don't know if you know this story, but 3M was downsizing, and your dad was ordered to fire 25 or 30 engineers. And many of these engineers have been with the company, like Mr. Peterson, for 30 or 35 years. And it made the company millions and millions and millions of dollars, and patents, and the stuff they invented. And your dad refused. Well, he told the president of the company, if you want to fire him, you come fire him. I'm not going to do it. And so what happened is your dad he lost his job as electronic sector leader and was made chief maintenance man for the whole company. So we said, Walt, you're now the head janitor. And but he was the chief of maintenance for the buildings all over the world. Yeah. And anyway, yeah, it was, well, Bill, I think we ought to take a break.
Pause it here.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, isn't it?
You didn't know that about your dad, huh?
No, I didn't know that.
You didn't brag, huh?
No, he kept pretty much to himself here. Let me turn this so I can get my finger over to pause it.